Hello, my name's Roger Perry and welcome to a Bevington Group vignette. The purpose of the vignette is to give you a quick overview of a subject, to give you some ideas as to what you can do in your challenges in a business, corporate or government context. Now, before starting, I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the lands from which I'm broadcasting, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. Now, Australia's productivity challenge. So we're going to talk about what that challenge is very briefly, and then what are sensible responses to that challenge. And I'm hoping this is a bit of a call to action. Many of you will be facing productivity challenges, and the challenge for us overall is it's not great for future generations of Australians if we don't get a handle on this. But let's get stuck straight in. Okay, we're going to cover some of the pressures that organizations are facing today, an overview of some of the approaches that you might consider, and we'll do a mini deep dive, only a mini, because this is a vignette. It doesn't last long. It's a 15-minute video, such that we can really give you a sense of where to go next. And you can give us a call if you need more information. Okay, financial pressures, things you know. Well, we've had high inflation, but hopefully at the time of this video, it's ameliorating. Hopefully interest rates, they've been historically high, but hopefully getting better. Labor shortages have been happening, but hopefully getting a little bit better. Now, we have had poor consumer sentiment, some sign of an uptick, but still not terribly strong. So those are pressures that can be unhelpful. But the real money slide here is this slide on the right. Unit labor costs going up. And down here, we've got labor productivity per hour. And you can see here that actually we have a very big dip here at the 2024 point. So we had a material drop in the June quarter. So this is a bit of a challenge for us. And actually, we haven't had great productivity numbers for quite some time. Now, depending on which economist you read, but most of them agree that if you've got low levels of productivity, it is not great for the well-being, the lifestyle of future generations. So if we don't deal with it, we're challenging future generations of Australians. So that's the question. How do we deal with it? And is there a role for individual organizations and leaders? And the answer is there most certainly is. So if we actually look at what's happening at company gross operating profits quarterly year on year, it's interesting to note, and I don't think it's accidental, there are many factors here that concomitant with low productivity, we've had a decrease in overall profits. So it's not a fabulous story. Now, there are many reasons to be grateful, including ameliorating inflation and ameliorating pressures in terms of vacancies and so forth. But productivity, we do want to get on top of, and it hasn't been great. And of course, we have this problem here with quarterly year-on-year challenges to profitability. So how can we respond? Okay, well, if it was a short-term challenge, you might think of responding in these sorts of ways, but we're warning against them because if it's a long-term challenge and you're left having to fight for the long term for a better financial position, then some of these are actually not great. In fact, they may have a negative impact which will affect your long-term health. So you can reduce discretionary spending, okay, but if it's removing the fruit from the kitchen, you'll only basically end up hurting staff morale. If you reduce service levels, it might help initially, but it can also help chase off customers to competitors. Aggressive inventory management might work, except to the point that you don't have something to sell. Pressure in suppliers, not so great if it pushes suppliers out of the market. Price rises, okay for a while, but again, you might push customers as well. Recruitment freezes, okay, but you might end up with a service level problem. Rebalancing permanent contingent workforce, okay, yes. So actually having a more permanent workforce is good, but you do lose some flexibility. And rapid restructures, well, we'll come to that in a few minutes' time. Restructures without appropriate thought can be problematic. So these are all okay if you're in an emergency, but if you've actually got to have a longer term strategy, and bear in mind that we have had low productivity for a while, it's got worse, but we've had low productivity for a while, then you might want to consider a different set of approaches. And that's what this video here is about. So here we think there are other places that you can look. that give you a much longer term benefit. But you can still get some short-term benefits, there's no question, but it's sustainable change. You can look at process inefficiencies, and everyone's got them. We have produced a vignette on process debt. It's worthwhile looking at. You can have capability gaps, not the right skills in the right places, especially to approach new markets and new products. You can have excessive manual effort. This goes hand in hand with process inefficiencies. So lack of automation. You can have flexibility challenges. So you really can't respond fast enough to changes in market or produce products fast enough or respond to competitor moves fast enough. Ineffective structures, they just don't get the job done at the right price, and legacy technology challenges. We'll talk a little bit less about that today because we won't have time, but it's certainly a thing. So essentially, what we're proposing is that one of the things we could and should do, and indeed we think most organizations have a responsibility to do because it helps with Australia's productivity challenge, is become better in sustainable ways. So process inefficiencies, deal with process reengineering. Excessive manual effort, deal with process automation. As you'll see in a moment, those two can and should be done together. Ineffective structures, deal with it with an effective piece of structural thinking, and that's taking an operating model view. Dealing with capability gaps, dealing with role redesign and possibly restructuring. A little bit more on that in a moment. Flexibility challenges, new ways of working, and of course, legacy technology challenges and modern architecture. We're not going to get time, as I said, on that today. That will be a future vignette. Now, given you have those choices, well, you've also got a question, where do you apply these techniques? So one way to think about that, and we've talked about this in other webinars, is actually look at your value driver tree. How do you end up earning value? And value could be money, but there are other ways, including social value. So on the left-hand side, there's the value that you're aiming to produce. And then as you go further to the right-hand side, it increasingly breaks down into its component parts. At one point in time, you'll reach a branch of the tree, and you should choose a branch of the tree that you would like to focus on, or several. But you can't do everything at once. You have limited resources and limited time. They should be prioritized, and you get to them in groups or even one at a time if you're very limited in terms of resources. So prioritize where you're going to look to apply those techniques. But you can apply multiple techniques, and often they are applied together. So for example, process reengineering and automation go hand in hand. And indeed, process reengineering and restructuring often go hand in hand because you free up time. The freed up time means that you've got more time in roles. That leads you to restructure roles. That leads you to restructure the groupings of roles. So these things are linked. So quickly into process reengineering. So process inefficiency is very common. And if you do look for our process debt vignette, you'll get a sense of just how common it is. But certainly, we find that you can have enormous benefits from reengineering a process. And there are actually very few situations where there are no process benefits to be had at all, but you can get 35% plus waste in a process that you can actually tackle with some change. Could be because of outdated workflows. You could be doing manual entry. You could have redundant approval processes, many, many things. But the thing about poor process is that it can frustrate customers. It can irritate staff. It can increase risks, and it's certainly higher cost because you're doing things often that you just don't need to do. So it makes sense to address what we call process debt. So process debt, essentially, processes that are no longer fit for purpose. Now, the great news is there's a lot available today to help you with this particular journey. So there are well understood process steps that you can go to re-engineer your process. From current state mapping, forming a current state analysis, where's the opportunity, to model certain scenarios, what could you do that would make a difference, and to confirm and map your future processes. There are ways to look at a process differently. There's process modeling. You can look at your performance numbers. You can look at the customer journey map, and you can think of a process as the internal view as to what you're doing to customers on the outside, the customer journey map. And there are all sorts of new tools for process mining and task mining that gives you lots of detail to work through your processes with. So there's lots available. So that's one of the cool things. There are lots of tools that will help you get there. Don't have time to go into them in detail here. It is a vignette, but there's process mapping tools. There's data capture analysis and change management tools that are available that weren't available even 5 years ago that will help you get through this particular challenge. Now, you can re-engineer, but you can also automate. even the pieces of the process that you haven't removed. So first of all, you can take out the bits of the process that you don't need, or take out time that you don't need. You can then automate a whole bunch of processes. And there is robotic process automation that's been available for quite some time. And with the advent of AI, increasingly that is turning into intelligent automation, which is robotic process automation plus AI. What this allows you to do is not just to remove steps that don't need to be there anymore, so waste steps, but actually take even value-added steps and slowly over time, as you can see here, automate them. We think that over time with intelligent automation in this particular simple workflow, most of the steps will end up actually being automated in many organizations, freeing up staff to do much more value-added activity. And there is plenty of work to do. So what do we propose if you combine the process reengineering and the automation to determine which processes to improve? You might choose to start at your value driver tree or your process architecture. That is a subject for another day. Process map to understand what's going on, re-engineer the process, and then automate what you've got left. And you can do so at a fair old clip, and there are tools, plenty of good tools around to help you do all of that. Now, restructuring. First thing to note is restructuring possibly has a bad name, and really for good reasons, because an awful lot of restructures do fail for various reasons, sometimes because of poor strategic concept, but often because it's not appreciated that actually a restructure, if it only does the structure piece, has a lower probability of working. And the main reason is that organizations don't work through structure alone. So if you take, for example, roles out, you might still have the work, and that just puts pressure on the organizations. A better way to think about restructuring is to take an operating model view, and that recognizes that different parts of the organization are connected. So services are connected to processes. There are obviously are run essentially by parts of the organization, which includes peoples and partners, infrastructures used to deliver them. There are information and incentives that are used to manage them, and the disciplines and oversights that actually execute the management of them. So if you change one part of the operating model, you can inadvertently change another. Designing your restructure with this in mind, we know, massively improves your chances of success. So there are plenty of ways to do this, but each of the ways to do this has some common themes. The systems thinking approach, the interconnected parts I've just talked about, and there are a number of steps. We'll leave this on the slides. I won't go through this now as to the steps that you need to go through at a minimum in order to deliver a good restructure. Again, just like in process, just like in automation, lots of modern tools that weren't available 5 years ago to help you through the journey. It's a subject for another day as to what these are and how to use them, but that includes operating model design tools. We certainly use them. We use some very, very modern tech, and essentially it makes things an awful lot less risky. Very handy. Role redesign. This is associated with and goes hand in hand usually with a good restructure, but it's pulled out because sometimes even without a restructure, you can end up with role redesign. So if you increase automation, you end up potentially removing enough tasks of a role that you're actually going to combine different role types to create new roles. So one of the things you've got to think of, though, is what are your design principles? Because there are benefits for your staff and benefits for your organization. You have to decide how you're going to design roles. Are they going to be more interesting roles? That doesn't happen automatically. To make a good role requires some design thinking, such that it actually is a humanistically designed, fulfilling role that adds value to your organization and your customers. So it can happen as a consequence of some of the earlier steps. It can happen with restructuring. It can happen independently of restructuring, but it does need thought. So it's pulled out. Now, new ways of working. So new ways of working, think about this as non-traditional approaches to structuring work that needs to be done. So if we think about the traditional hierarchical structure, it was often functional in one way or another, or it was siloed in one way or another. You might have customer teams that are separate, you might have product teams that are separate, but those silos may have problems interacting and communicating. Different ways of working often attempt to get above and beyond those problems. A classic example is the agile thinking that's built into many agile as BAU structures that you see appearing right around the market in large organizations to try to take advantage of the benefits that come from agile approaches. Now, it's not the only way of working approach, but it is one of the most common, and it really tries to get at the benefits outlined in this slide, particularly speed, adaptability, creativity, and risk reduction. So, of course, if you can, for example, produce products and or different services faster than your competitors and seize the high ground, that's very helpful. And those organizations that are consistently doing that often have a different way of working. And a way of working, though, is often associated with a different operating model. So we'll come back to that systems thinking idea we talked about earlier. These things are often connected. Okay, this vignette, we've moved fast. So in summary, what we're suggesting is that actually all of us have a responsibility to think about productivity because productivity has an impact on future generations. Productivity challenges might be actually leaving you in a position where there's some financial struggles that your organization has to get through or problems achieving its targets, social or financial. And we're suggesting that sustainable approaches to this would be sensible to consider. And we've gone through some of the biggies here, and they're summarized in this particular slide. That's all for me. There's more detail you can find on the Bevington website on some of these subjects. I'll leave you to enjoy the rest of your day.